Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back. Quick little intro here for you before we get to the show. Returning guest Mike Lombard is here to discuss the history of his family trucking business that was sold off in 1984. Lombard Trucking. What a great story. Mike's been digging into old employee company newsletters and various artifacts of the business, and he joins the show to share a bunch of that with us, as well as his perspective on what happened to Lombard Trucking downstream of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 and where all that fits together. Was very happy to have Mike on. I'm going to be using this discussion as part of the research for my book, End of the Road, Inside the War on Truckers, being published by Creed and Culture Books. It will be out in early 2026. You guys have heard me advertise that before. Check out links in the show notes to an announcement for the book, and if you can help chip in and help me write it, that'd be great. I'll have links to all of Mike Lombard's various projects, and he's busy. He's doing all kinds of stuff and about to run another Ironman, so you should go and check Mike out and cheer for him. He's really great, super high energy, wants everybody to be the best versions of themselves that they can. A real good ambassador for the industry and for health and being just a good human. So, let's get to it. Let's hear from Mike Lombard. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I am Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're about to hear is a returning guest to the show, very good friend of mine, someone you've seen all over the internet, whether he's yelling at you while running down the road, carrying a plate carrier, and talking about the various battles Napoleon was involved in, or running Ironmans, running marathons, just trying to keep the world healthy, trying to promote truckparkingclub.com, trying to do what he can to make truck drivers better and the trucking industry better for those drivers, is my returning guest, Mr. Mike Lombard. Welcome to the show, sir.
Dude, it's good to be back. I've loved seeing this show, how this show's taken off. It's great to talk about it, especially being at the Mid-America Truck Show. I was handing out some of your flyers to Canadians as well, and to talk about it, and then also tell people that they've heard your name before. Oh wait, I've seen that guy. I've seen that guy's name around. So, it was great to see like the reach that's gone on, and see the traction the show's built up, and people in conversation when I talk about him and mention you, they're like, oh wait, I've heard that guy before. I've heard his voice, and it stands out. Personal branding is huge, and the voice of Gord is an iconic voice, and it's reaching the thousands and growing every day. So I'm stoked to be back on it, and that you're still doing it.
Damning me with faint praise. Thank you so much, Mike. Well, as you know, the title of my show is self-referential humor because, I sound like what I sound like. But today we brought you back for some serious business that has less to do with me and more to do with you. I want my listeners to know, and my readers eventually, for the book I'm working on, because I think the story of your family and the trucking business they established and the tumult they went through before they finally closed up are a key component to the story of trucking in general and the sort of thesis of my book, and a long-running argument in the industry about the effects of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. And Lombard Trucking was one of these very successful sort of immigrant built business stories, a marquee name that was around for decades and a fixture in our business. And then what happened to it? And I think I want to hear more about it. I want to hear you tell the story, the history of Lombard Trucking, and get some stuff down on the record here, and help me out as I work through the book.
No, I appreciate you having me on to talk about it because I tell this story a lot, and the reason why it's so important has everything to do because the story itself is like my why, and we talk about your why and like the fitness space and the fitness industry a lot, like especially when it comes to staying motivated, staying disciplined, and the opportunity to tell this story is important. I called myself Lombard Trucking on the internet back in 2010 when I made a Twitter, and I was still in the Marines at the time. Like I wasn't even driving a truck, but it's always something I've been so proud of. Because in Waterbury, Connecticut, before we get on the show, I was telling you where HQ was for Lombard. There's a strip mall plaza in its place, and it's still called Lombard Plaza. And that plaza was sold, over 10 years ago, and the people who bought it kept the name of it because of its historical significance. And so, and where I got some of like a lot of this data and history. Is from people who've compiled books from Italian American families within Waterbury, and the story itself it's an inherently American story, and it tells the story of the American dream in detail. And it's not the ones, when we think about the rise of the United States, we always think about big names like, Carnegie, Rockefeller. Like we think about those names, the railroads, the Vanderbilts, you hear about those names, and where those names are very prominent. I think it's because of their extraordinary wealth that was accumulated, and what doesn't go talked about enough are the stories like this, or the Lombard story, which we're talking about one of the original motor carrier, like first people to be a motor carrier in the United States, and the rise and how trucking companies grew, and how the supply chains grew with it. And the Lombard story is a huge part of it. And before we get into it, I recently, I was on LinkedIn having a conversation, or I was tagged in a post on LinkedIn from an interview I had done, and somebody had said some negative things about me, calling me a sellout for working over at Truck Parking Club. And not to get into too many details, but we were going back and forth, and I was talking about why I am so for the industry, especially from the driver side of things. Given that my last name has now goes back 100 years in freight, and the guy was essentially telling me about how my family story is irrelevant anymore. It doesn't matter. And I like normally when it comes to the haters online, I've made it very easy to not take things personal. But at this point, I do take it personal because the Lombard story has every bit of detail and every bit of importance into looking back on how the industry can make some better improvements. Again, we can't close Pandora's box. We can't just, we're not gonna go backwards and take away the Motor Carrier Act or something that's too hard, but we can learn from the Lombard story. But if I'm not around, or if I was doing other stuff to not tell it, that's the thing. Nobody else is telling that story anymore. Like it's going away, and there's probably hundreds of other companies similar to Lombard throughout the United States who nobody's telling that story. And so if I don't keep talking about it and we don't have these conversations, you don't write your book, then the story will eventually die. And then, given the current trajectory of how much change is coming to the industry, it might not turn out for the better, especially from the driver's seat. We see you cover so many topics on this show where we see some of the issues we have going on with technology. Talking about your episode with Karen Levy, with the non-domiciled CDLs, we have all these different issues, and the way how Lombard operated and their growth is every bit of evidence to fix it. So I'm stoked to dive in.
Yeah, it sort of pains me to hear that someone would attack your family history and the business and claim it's all irrelevant. Um, there's a sort of, I think the term is presentism. where people just sort of think like everything that's happening today is all that matters and how we got here, as they put it, is irrelevant. I don't believe that's true. There's lots of lessons to be learned about now from the past. And, if you don't honor it and if you don't honor things that were built up, these good things, these family histories, these companies, and then the value they produce and provide to their fellow man and their country, then what have you got? It's a bummer, but it's a bummer somebody would do that. But let's start with Nikki Lombard and a brief sort of beginning history of your family trucking business, like how they got started in Connecticut, what they started hauling, and the sort of initial growth trajectory.
Yeah, I'd love, and if you don't mind, I really want to read from these sources. And I've got, I know that you don't do video, but I've got these old newsletters, taillights, and I have this. I have a 50th anniversary, like the company's 50th anniversary newsletter, which their 50th anniversary was this came out in January of 1974.
Just
So
before you start, Mike, just before you start, I'm glad you've got that, but I want my listeners to know that you yourself have started a newsletter as part of your work with Truck Parking Club. And so I think it's on Substack. It's through the truckparkingclub.com website. You can sign up for Taillights, which is your own sort of newer, updated version of this family trucking company newsletter. And I think it's great that you've given them an homage like that. And I quite enjoy reading it.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Yeah, you can go to newsletter.truckparkingclub.com and subscribe to it. It drops every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I've got some, I have some input in there for DOT compliance, so staying with like little fun facts from a former Texas DPS officer, worked in commercial vehicle enforcement, who gives a lot of good information every week. Input from affiliates and partners we work with and their content, and then just covering some topics, but it's from the driver perspective. So I mean, and I talk about truck parking. So I get a lot of good feedback from drivers that I'm excited to also start sharing within the newsletter from our trucker members who read it. I got a lot of great feedback from yesterday's, which, I kind of went into the speed limiter bill, the Drive Act that Josh Burkeen had put back in, so that way we can take speed limiters off the table for good. And then I went into the Arkansas bill that had passed and kind of how it was essentially a Band-Aid. It doesn't it's a, we see that there's going to be fines for not speaking English, but I mean, it doesn't put them out of service. Like you just get fined and they keep driving. So it kind of misses the mark. And I woke up this morning to emails about it, but it's great to bring the name of that newsletter back. And because that's what it was. The company made this newsletter because we have to think about the time period. There's no internet. There's no email. There's none of that going on. The company stretched from Maryland to Maine. So how does the Baltimore terminal know about what's going on up at HQ? How do they know what's going on up in Worcester, Mass? Like how did they know? So this newsletter would go out to every employee, and it would feature the employees. Like it would be like this driver came to us from this company, et cetera. This driver had just had welcome their new baby into the world. Like it goes into such great detail. So it's awesome. I appreciate you letting me plug that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love to see. I'm a self-described word cell. I like reading, and thus I like writing. I don't know how good I am at it. It's a work in progress. But when I see my friends dive into the writing game, and you're really good at it. Will Cook's pretty good at it. The Specifically to the trucking side of things, and yeah, your newsletter is fire, man. Like the quality level of the writing, I'm just like, damn. I mean, maybe Lombard should like maybe not run so much and devote more time to the keyboard. I don't know. It's good stuff, dude. Keep doing it.
Oh yeah, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep manifesting. Again, the future is unwritten, so we're gonna keep writing it. We'll see where writing and all that where it can take me.
All right, so let's get into the actual Lombard Trucking Taillights newsletter. You said this is the 50th anniversary edition. So what year is this?
So this issue came out in 1974. when it happened. And as far as I know, Lombard incorporated it in 1923. So I mean, this being the first 1923, or it could have been 1924. I have to check because in other excerpts, it says, it could have happened in 19. It was between 1922 and 1924, because I'll dive into some of these historical accounts. So maybe 1924 was the actual first year that they had the. I guess you'd have to look at when the ICC was giving out MC numbers, and to go back, I'd have to dive into that. And I've been doing some research into trying to acquire ownership of Lombard's old DOT and MC number, and I need to chase down somebody from North Penn Transfer. But another story. But I mean, right from this newsletter, I'll kind of read through this piece, and then I'll go. There's a book. There's a book that was written that has a bunch of Italian American families from Waterbury that also synopsizes the story, and then as well as I have this excerpt that was written, which is on a Facebook page that Johnny Lombard, who was one of the owners, had also written up about it, knowing the history. So in this newsletter, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary, and it describes Lombard as how it started back in the early 1920s with two brothers, each with a horse and wagon, making pickups and deliveries in downtown Waterbury. The brothers, of course, were Joseph and Nicholas Lombard, and the company they founded is our own Lombard Brothers Incorporated. The road from then to now has not always been easy. Shortly after the company was started, the Great Depression arrived. These days were difficult for all businesses, but because of the new trucking company's ability to deliver small shipments to many stops quickly and dependably, it was able to show a profit. Business continued to grow during the early 1930s. However, all shipments up into this time were picked up and delivered within the state of Connecticut. The need for a wider delivery area led to the decision to pioneer over-the-road service, of which Joseph Lombard personally drove the historic first run to Philadelphia in 1932, starting the expansion, which has continued to the present, resulting in a system which stretches from Boston to Washington. The truck fleet has grown in size from the first two trucks to over 700 units, now with 10 terminals, a modern central maintenance shop, and a recently completed HQ. The company facilities rank among the finest in the nation, but buildings and equipment alone do not explain the continuing success enjoyed by Lombard Brothers. It comes from the quality of personnel offering shippers dependable, personalized service from driver to corporate offices. Teamwork and cooperation have provided customer satisfaction and continued growth. Sincere appreciation is expressed to all employees, shippers, and suppliers for the important role each has played in helping attain the golden anniversary milestone. But kind of going into the story, like really getting into the family roots, this book describes them really well. They called them two enterprising brothers, came to Waterbury. They arrived in 1904 with their immigrant parents, and he describes it as experiencing the Horatio Alger saga. With a horse and wagon business, they began the partnership of Lombard Brothers Incorporated, which expanded to one of the largest motor transport carriers in the East, describing Nicholas and Joseph J. Lombard, who were sons of Anthony and Angeline, natives of Caserta and Naples, respectively. Now, Nicholas was born right outside of Naples in 1891. Joseph was born in Derby, Connecticut on January 9th in 1900. The parents of Nicholas arrived in the country in 1898. They lived in New Haven, Derby, Plantsville before finally getting to Waterbury in 1904. At 13 years old, Nicholas, or Nicky Lombard, was helping his father load and drive a horse-drawn wagon with sand and other materials to construction sites. Later, the boy was delivering ice. He had found work at the Scoville Manufacturing Company and Barlow Brothers, which goes into that next excerpt that talks into the equipment that they had had. Joseph Lombard was 8 years old when he helped his brother pedal ice. His first factory job was at a sandblasting machine at the old Waterbury Button Company. He quit to take a job in the soldering room at Scoville, but he was fired after 3 weeks after management learned he was only 15. He was hired at 16 in the Scoville planting room and later moved to the transportation department as a truck driver. But he was ambitious, and in 1919, he was driving what was called a jitney, which cost 5 cents a ride on North Main Street. So it's like public transportation. And on the side, he drove a dump truck. From there, that's when they had acquired two old trucks, and the brothers started the transportation business in 1923. At first, they moved furniture, and then they transported other materials. With Nicholas as president, Joseph the treasurer, the Lombard brothers' partnership expanded consistently as trucks moved freight that had been monopolized by railroads. In 1932, that's when Joseph drove the truck from Waterbury to Philadelphia, inaugurating which opened up a new route for the company. Eventually, the firm ended up owning 12. In another expert, it was 13 terminals in 7 states from Portland, Maine to Baltimore. On its 50th anniversary in 1973, Lombard Brothers owned a fleet of 120 straight body units, 200 tractors, 350 trailers. Company vehicles hauled annually over 500,000 tons of merchandise, registered over 11 million miles for $15 million of volume of business. Its payroll exceeded over 600 employees, and a new headquarters had opened up on Mill Street. It goes on and says, let's see. And then another terminal was built on Reedville Drive as the company increased its services. Now, what's really cool about this is, as an avid baseball fan, Joseph Lombard helped return a pro baseball team to Waterbury. He and associates operated the team called the Waterbury Timers until 1950. Now, they were called the Waterbury Timers because the Timex Museum is in Waterbury, and that's where Timex watches were made. But unfortunately, declining attendance forced the abandonment of the Colonial Baseball League. So the league they were in had disbanded. Joseph was involved in professional trucking associations. He generously supported Boys Towns of Italy, which was like a club locally in Waterbury. The brothers were married to the DeVito sisters, Nicholas to Clotilda, Joseph to Giacomo. The sisters and their children operated the family company after the brothers died. Lombard Brothers was sold in June of 1984 to North Penn Transfer of Lansdale, Pennsylvania. But this one goes even a little bit deeper, describing how in 1919, shortly after the end of the First World War, a 25-year-old Italian immigrant took a job at the shipping department at Scoville Manufacturing. And I'm kind of repeating myself with this other story, but it has the actual equipment. They talk about a wagon, and they had a team of 8 horses, and they were delivering freight for the bustling manufacturers to nearby towns. Here, and this is kind of shows the evolution of how freight started moving. When he inquired about shipments that had sat on the company docks undelivered for 2 or 3 days, his supervisor explained that these were for customers from the northwest corner, describing the northwest corner of Connecticut, who had come in and pick up the freight themselves. Realizing that there was the necessity of shipping and receiving the manufacturing staples in a timely fashion, he sought permission to deliver the accumulating freight on his own time. By 1922, Nick and Joseph, with their own horse-drawn delivery wagon, were already known for fast freight deliveries from the Burgoyne Waterbury Railroad yards to surrounding businesses. The new trucking company's ability to deliver small shipments to many stops quickly and independently made it a profitable venture. As business continued to grow in the 1930s, the need for wider delivery area expanded beyond Connecticut, which has pioneered this over-the-road service. Let's see. Starting an expansion, and they expanded. So here's the interesting part: is their expansion did not stop until 1984, resulting in a system which would stretch again from Portland, Maine, all the way to Baltimore. When Lombard Brothers sold their business in June, it had 13 terminals, 1,200 pieces of equipment, more than 800 employees. So it had a modest beginning, reached its apex with a designation as the second largest motor carrier based in Connecticut. So that's really like the Lombard story. And and I had grown up with my grandfather. And so when talking about a company like Lombard, and what's crazy, because in conversation, and we jump on these Twitter spaces, people always talk about, pre-deregulation and about how this idea where people think that if we were to go backwards, like if we were to make pre-1980, like if we were to just make today what it was pre-1980, that we'd only have like 5 big fleets. Like they think that there'd only like it would only just be like mega carriers, and that would be it, and they would all be union. When that's not how it rose. Like Lombard was one of many companies. It's just that the labor itself were all Teamster affiliates. Like so, you had multiple small family-owned companies that were just union carriers. That's what they were. So it's not that there was just these big companies. And I think people's views of unions have changed because now when you think union, you think it's big, when really it's not. And I think that legislation like the Motor Carrier Act happening is what kind of fractured it. So that way, so now it's like when you think of the Teamsters, it is only just big companies like UPS is a big one. But just like knowing and talking to somebody like somebody like my grandfather, I mean, he describes it when he would talk to me about why, because I asked him all the time why he didn't go back into it or why he left, and he described it. He would say word for word, the government got involved, they ruined it, they let anybody in, it's full of bottom feeders. And that's how he described it. And when you think about this company, again, at the end of the day, it wasn't he was a part owner of Lombard, but he was also a driver. He drove for 30 years. Like he drove every single day for that company as an owner. So people think that you wouldn't be able to start motor carriers or start businesses before it. I just don't know how true that necessarily is, but that's the Lombard story. And depending on what questions you got, again, I've got some. When it comes to the Motor Carrier Act itself, I've got some direct quotes from a former employee of Lombard, who's one of my cousins, Ronnie Lombard, who goes into kind of what happened with after the Motor Carrier Act and where the company was primed at, and some of his experiences.
Right. So, one of the features of regulation of the formerly regulated trucking market was that I believe you had to publish rates, and the government could, impose. They imposed a very high hurdle in order to issue for issuing authorities to companies to operate. So I'm curious what sort of authorities Lombard Trucking had, how they got them over time, whether that system changed at all before deregulation, what lanes you guys had, like how did that all sort of function throughout the history of the company up to 1980?
Yeah, which interestingly enough, I'm gonna go over to my email because I had a gentleman, and he's a Twitter mutual of ours. Um, he sent me recently. He sent me recently some of their authority documents and these are really cool, and I can send you pictures of these. Now, these authority documents would give them, uh, yeah, as you said, like permission on certain lanes. So like I have this one right in here, and it's from and it's a given authority for a certain, and it gives an order for like the specific route and what the commodities are. It's like this one from February 4th, 1964 for their MC, which is 42289. And it's given to Lombard Brothers Incorporated, Waterbury, Connecticut. And when you read these, they're like it's in a bunch of legal terms. At a session of the Interstate Commerce Commission, Division One, held at its office in Washington D.C. on the fourth day of February, A.D. 1964. It's funny how they type these out. After due investigation, it appearing that the above named carrier has complied with all applicable provisions of the ICC, of the Interstate Commerce Act, and the requirements, rules, and regulations prescribed thereunder, and therefore is entitled to receive authority from this commission to engage in transportation in the interstate, in interstate or foreign commerce as a motor carrier and commissioned to the finding. It is so ordered that said carrier can be and is hereby granted this certificate of public convenience and necessity as evidence. Now it goes on without giving all these words. It is further ordered that the transportation service to be performed by the said carrier in interstate or foreign commerce shall be as specified below. It gives Part A, regular routes, general commodities except those of unusual value, Class A and B explosive household goods as defined, and it gives it the lane between Litchfield, Connecticut, and Boston, Massachusetts, serving all intermediate points from Litchfield over Connecticut, and gives the specific highways: Highway 25 to Torrington, thence over Connecticut Highway 4 to Canton, and it goes down and gives these specific links between Winsted and Canton, and it goes down like almost by the route, similar to how you'd get probably permits for oversized loads. is kind of how it's kind of how this stuff reads. Like
Yeah, no, it's an interesting historical artifact, and I think I think that points a little bit to the sort of critics of the regulatory regime, like well, why is the government telling you like exactly what highways and what towns you can service? We're supposed to have this free market, and we have this sort of older system, um, and it sounds a little bit like my family history in trucking got started by my grandpa going to work for this guy named Fred Norton in Hamilton, Ontario. And he had Norton Motor Lines, and Norton's had one of these permits, authorities, as it were, that stipulated, general freight, Hamilton, Toronto, Winnipeg. That was their thing, like back and forth to Winnipeg. Um, they weren't allowed to go any further, I don't think, than Winnipeg. And I think they sort of consolidated stuff and then had it delivered. I can't remember how it went, but that was it. Like that was Norton's bread and butter. Winnipeg, Toronto, Winnipeg, Toronto. And it's sort of like a letter of marque almost, right? Like the government's telling you you can go and attack this country's ships and keep the stuff, but like only this country's ships with only these flags, only these markets, only these roads. It's sort of, it does sound a little bit like ancient history.
Yeah, it's like old school in its ways, like how it gives these specific routes. Even one of them on here when it talks about specific commodities, like one of them authorizes them to haul freight that's either monuments or tombstones, like right down to that level. And I've got a whole bunch of these that he had sent me that he gotten them. I guess they're just old ICC documents that he had gotten through whatever his resources are. But what's crazy is he had told me when it comes to, so if I wanted to get like, and this is how it relates to, because we have all these companies now with like Shell, we have all these Shell MC numbers, with companies registered to different addresses. And so if I wanted to get Lombard's old MC number, he told me, he said, what you have to do, he says it's close to impossible. It would take a lot of footwork. I guess FMCSA doesn't like to do transfers because of fraud. And apparently this would take 6 to 12 months for them to do. But since Lombard sold to North Penn Transfer, which they were out of Pennsylvania, I would have to have I would have to have the corporate documents from North Penn Transfer. So that means I'd have to probably acquire the whichever entity of North Penn existed in Connecticut, and then I'd have to activate it. I'd have to get an SS4 letter that would match the company name. I'd get some other documents that FMCSA would ask for to go through this. And if they were to approve it, I would have to set up my own DOT number, and then I'd have to detach an MC from that and then attach the Lombard MC number to it. So it's great, like to stop fraud because of the transfer of that MC, I'd have to go through, you'd have to jump through all these hoops just to get the number of a company that's kind of like in my family's name. And it's a pretty wild concept to think that they don't want to give it out because of fraud, even though
Yeah, that's hilarious because like freight fraud is a major problem in trucking right now. And one of the issues is that the DOT or FMCSA can shut down an MC number after their safety rating goes too bad or they get found to be fraudulent or engaging in bad practices. And then the guys that ran it just change the name and re-register under a different MC number. Like it's this those guys are allowed to run free, and here you are trying to, get a hold of a legacy MC number that's been part of your family since forever, and it's just hoops and landmines all over the place.
yeah, it's kind of ironic in the sense, but it's ironic. I'm disappointed, but not surprised is about probably the best way to describe it. Kind of going in this ICC stuff, I wanted to pull out this quote from my cousin Ronnie Lombard, who had done just about every job at Lombard Brothers, besides being a driver. I mean, starting off on the docks, because he describes this on the ICC, saying, how the ICC essentially established standard rates for all commodities. So if freight was moved from Waterbury to Philadelphia and it was 200 pounds and was a pallet of brake shoes, the price would be the same. Between other companies, it was the level, but it was the level of service that was determined by the shipper who was paying the bill. So the industry was a very service-oriented business with standardized rates. Deregulation destroyed it because it eliminated the ICC. But however, and he talks about how in this bill, what was also they had eliminated certain things that had to do with OSHA. Like OSHA went through an entire kind of recyclement when the Motor Carrier Act happened. So it like all of the safety standards that had existed, he says kind of basically went away. Like it eliminated certain ways to do preventative maintenance logs that were kept on any company operating under the ICC, along with stuff for driver's logs. I mean, he talks about like when it comes to Lombard's innovation, like Lombard never used retreaded tires, and he describes Lombard as he's a huge pioneer, being one of the first companies to use lighted wind deflectors as a means of advertising on the trucks. Lombard started an early implementation of GPS, which would monitor drivers' idle and off time, so it would monitor fuel consumption. And again, this is a company operating. This is the 1980s. They're doing this like to see how much money with fuel. Lombard purchased fiberglass trailers, which cut down repair costs compared to aluminum skins from tow motors hitting the sides. And Lombard has this mascot, and I'll show it to you. I know you don't have video, but this mascot Lombard invented, which is this picture right here. I can show you, which this little truck in the bottom corner. If you see it, it's a truck holding like standing, and it's holding up a trophy. And the name of that mascot was Cosmo, and Cosmo stood for Consolidation of Shipments Move Overnight. And they like just up funny things to do.
That's basically the LTL model, right? Like, that's what all of the yeah, Old Dominion and Yellow and all of these sort of LTL guys. That's their entire thing. Small shipments come to our dock. We put everything going in one direction on a couple of trailers. Goes to that terminal, and then the next day the other guys deliver it. Repeat ad nauseum, right?
Yeah, they did have some. I think I had read somewhere that there were of their trucks, they did have like 42 or 52 guys who were over the road. Now he talks about his role, his position when the company was sold. He was the assistant safety director, and he was the only one of the only training people at the company. He went to every terminal, checked driver's logs, PMs, training, and all the employees who needed hazmat. He had gotten a master's degree in industrial relations, labor and contract negotiations. So like he went to school specifically for this stuff. He was a stock boy, freight loader, dispatcher, office clerk until he was that assistant safety director. And he said everything that happened to Lombard Brothers was because of what the government did. But another result of the Motor Carrier Act, again, he talks about how it devalued the company. When Jimmy Carter had signed the act, the value of the rights went down to just what the cost of the rights were spread out over a 5-year period. So in other words, over time, the actual cost of those rights were 7.5 million, and that all meant that and all that meant after the installation of the Motor Carrier Act was spreading of the deduction on the balance sheet to 1.5 million per year. So those rights alone would have been worth over 30 million had deregulation never happened. Everything I stated above is just the value of the business. All the real estate was separate from the operating company. The company was sold for 5 million, then was sued by the buyer as the value of the rights became reduced. Therefore, the ending value was 3.75 million. Imagine after 68 years as a company as rich as Lombard Brothers, only worth $3.75 million dollars. And he says, I'm a Republican today because of what Jimmy Carter did to our family and all three generations of families that work for us. And that's essentially how a lot of people felt, and that's how a lot of them changed immediately. They all switched sides. So we've seen this shift, and I think we're kind of seeing this shift again. We saw Sean O'Brien of the Teamsters, they didn't endorse a candidate. We're kind of seeing this shift back either to one side or to going independent and not aligning themselves with certain political parties, seeing that they're kind of used as fodder as football. But that's how, I mean, when you think about how powerful something is the Motor Carrier Act, the fact that there's not one Lombard besides me who didn't work for it that went back in the industry. Not one. They all went to real estate. One of the cousins owns a Ford dealership in Northern Connecticut. The gentleman, my cousin Ronnie Lombard, he himself is a real estate broker. He does other stuff, as does Johnny Lombard. He works in real estate. None of them had gotten involved in the industry because they were so disgusted and felt absolutely betrayed by the government. Now knowing this growing up, and my grandmother herself describes it. She says she'll never forget the day it happened because of how your grandfather came home. He said he came home. I'd never seen him so mad. And all he did when he came home, he said, they're going to let any motherfucker do this. Those are his exact words. They're going to let anybody in. It's unbelievable. And like hearing this, and then even hearing my grandfather say it years ago. And I have this specific memory where we were near a TA and we had pulled out of another parking lot, and a truck had cut him off. Like a semi truck cut my grandfather off, and he was like fuming mad. He like literally got out of the car and started screaming at the guy as he was driving off. And it's like, it was super funny. And as soon as he got back in the car, he was saying it again. He goes, describing how he's like, I swear to God, like these motherfuckers, they change it. They're piece of shit. That guy's, they do it for nothing. He's using this kind of union rhetoric, but I didn't know what union rhetoric was, and freaking middle school and high school, because I had no idea what unions were or anything like that. But he was
Right.
using that rhetoric and always described them as it's bottom feeders. It's they're, and he would even say look at the equipment, that the trucks aren't, their trucks aren't even clean. They're driving around crap. He would describe like the tires on the side of the road, this idea of retreads, like talking about the tires on the road. He goes, you'd never see that in my day. You'd never see that sort of stuff on the highways. You'd never see any of that.
Yeah, I have some theories on the tire stuff that's somewhat separate from this, but so the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 passes, and I was just re-listening to my interview with Steve, actually not Steve, Michael Belzer, who wrote Sweatshops on Wheels, just to like refresh my brain on his book and what we talked about. And he was a Teamster truck driver in Chicago when the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 came into place. And he said within a few months, his the effects were like immediate. His salary got cut by like 30% overnight, the way he describes it. The price competition that started affecting the business was felt immediately, and like even him, protected with a Teamster job, noticed it, and like it made it very difficult for him. He said he had just bought a house, and he's got kids and bills and all the rest of it. And I'm curious to know the if Lombard Trucking went through the same immediate price pressure, and like how'd that look? What happened?
Well, that's I mean, it's kind of what had occurred. I mean, obviously they had sold in 1984, so it happened quickly. I mean, they were expanding all the way up until it. I mean, I know that the company itself, especially from reading through these news, did a lot to differentiate. Again, so I think a lot of the reason why they were able to at least limp on for almost 4 more years is the fact that they owned real estate. Like, so having the real estate was able to keep them going. They also, I mean, as a company, Lombard had a credit union. So they operated their own credit union, because I see in these newsletters where they talk about the banquet for the credit union they had. So they had differentiated in a lot of different ways, and really grew as a motor carrier themselves. But in '84, they must have decided to sell for those reasons. I haven't gotten the exact details, but what makes me believe the reason why they sold is how North Penn Transfer eventually folded. So when they sold it, which I'd imagine Lombard as a Teamster affiliate must have been telling drivers that their pay was going to go down, and nobody voted to do it. So they were probably going to hemorrhage employees because when they sold in '84, North Penn Transfer bought it. North Penn Transfer folded in 1991, and this I know from looking it up. They folded because of union contract negotiations. They couldn't get the employees to buy in on what they said the pay was going to be. So if North Penn Transfer folded due to union contract negotiations, then there's no reason to believe that Lombard itself couldn't wasn't in a position to pay their employees. I mean, we just when you talk about, like, I described how it was a service, a service-based industry, and I think these are the real. And we're starting to see, because we see brokers and stuff on LinkedIn who always complain about complain about working with bad carriers and stuff, and they'll pay for better service, and like that's what happens when you're not able to when the result of like, because of the Motor Carrier Act, that pay, as you described with Michael Belzer, like his pay being dropped, like you see this mass exodus of companies. I mean, I just want to read this customer service review, which very rarely happens. This one was addressed to my grandfather from the Calora Corporation, which was a division of Raytheon, and because that's what I think is another part, because not only did drivers at Lombard stay there for 30 years and have pensions and full benefits and great vacation time. This I know from from other relatives who were drivers. But on the flip side, these companies were giving tremendous customer service. Like, they were providing a great service for their customers, so much so that they describe it in these words, which was written by this gentleman, George Howland, who is a district manager. He writes, "Dear Mr. Lombard, if you will permit me a few minutes of your time, I should like to say thank you for the most excellent performance of your company's performance in the carrying of our goods between Topton, Pennsylvania, and all points in the Connecticut area. As district sales manager for Caloric in this state, I am on the firing line, so to speak, of all delivery problems inherent to the transport of our appliance products, and it has been my good fortune to see a dramatic improvement of deliveries in general, and to be the recipient of friendly and courteous assistance when I call for that extra effort in completing a rush delivery. I might add that a word of thanks is in order for all three terminals in Connecticut that both my customers and I myself had occasion to call for help. It certainly does help to ease the burden of our day-to-day business when we are under such pressure to get the goods delivered. Although our association has only been for the past several months, you are in a fine position to grow with us throughout the other parts of New England and New York State. If you do in fact serve those areas, and as an educated guess, our Connecticut traffic should amount to the middle five figures in this year alone. And with the potential mentioned, we could emerge as a very large customer. Not to belabor the point, but after 20 years of hit or miss effort by many of your competitive carriers with poor attitudes, missed deliveries, denial of justifiable freight claims, and all around bad relations, it is refreshing for me to be associated with your firm. Might I ask that you do me a favor and pass my most sincere thanks on down to the line to those good people whose day-to-day effort and achievement prompted this letter to begin with. Cordially, George Howland, District Manager." Which is just like, you're a wordsmith. You said you like to write. Are there any more customer reviews like that for motor carriers going around to that level? And this is in 1974. This is 1974 that this was posted.
That's
Uh,
that letter as a historical artifact. That's definitely going to make it into the book. And I'd like to make a point here. You talked about these LinkedIn guys and freight brokers complaining about bad carriers. Well, there's a cost associated with having good carriers, right? Like, competent people aren't going to work for nothing. Competent people also require competent management. They require a competent team to work with. And, like, everybody's got to have the same objective, the same standards, the same goals. And this sort of like hyper atomized, society we live in today, and then the interference into people's business by like sort of regulation on the other side of it, right? So like deregulation, we're talking about, the government basically said, we're not going to regulate the business side of this. Anybody can apply for an MC number, but there's no more lanes, just whoever wants to go trucking can go trucking. But they've transferred the regulation to, they're micromanaging the drivers, putting all these, basically harassing us. Lots of companies are top loaded with like HR people and safety people, and everyone's trying to tell you how to do your job. So we have this like different management paradigm. But like if you have people who are like working together, have got like common cause, everybody's competent, and you just let them be, they can provide service like that and then produce letters like this. If you're just like a shipper that's using a couple of different brokers and they're pulling guys off load boards, or maybe you've only got like a couple of dedicated carriers you use and it's a little bit of a mishmash of everything, well, you know maybe you might get some cost savings out of that, but there's sort of no guarantee of service. And one of the things I like about, like, it's pretty clear that Lombard was, as you put it, their success was based on the delivered service. And then, there's been a real devaluation of service as a concept, right? Like lots of people say they want it, but like at the same time, that you're going to have to pay a little bit extra, and companies that want to deliver it have got to like select for those people who are kind of committed to the idea of, there's a sort of objective value to showing up for work every day, having a good attitude. Let's do this together as a team. And when I say like as a team, like the organic, we feel like we're part of something bigger, not the sort of rah top down kind of fake corporate team. Yeah, we're all, together, but an organic sort of family or clan level, or, guys working together, voluntary team approach. And
there was a brotherhood to it. I had an internship when I was in college. I was ripping phones for a friend of mine who's a financial advisor, and he worked for Morgan Stanley, and so I was ripping cold calls for him, like for some extra coin. And there was a woman who worked in that office, who worked admin, and when I introduced myself to her. And it's always great when I would get this reference. I told her, I was like, "Oh, I'm Mike Lombard," and she was like, "Oh my God, are you a Lombard from the trucking company from Lombard Trucking?" And I said, "Yeah." I got goosebumps. Like it always felt good. And she was a little bit older. She's like, "Oh my God, I worked for Lombard for X number of years." She must have worked office admin as a dispatcher. I forget her exact role, but she said it. She's like, "That was the best job that I ever had. It was the greatest job ever. I loved going there every day." She was like, the atmosphere it was such a great place to be around. Like, I know it's always corny and cringe to say like, it was, when a company like we're family here, that it's like, there's trailers that say that like join our family. Like we think it's corny, but she describes it. She's like every holiday, like all this stuff, like for your birthday, anytime somebody had kids, like she always described it as like, she talked to me about it for like 15 minutes, like about how great it was and about how great like all the Lombards were. My grandmother herself describes like how they were around Christmas time, like during the Christmas parties. There was this buy-in that everybody at the company had, and I don't know if it's because that's how unions were back then. Because I think unions are less like that today now, and I think somewhat by design. But it was like that's how it's been described to me by not only my own grandfather, but people who I've never even met before. This is back in 2016. She was telling me this, there's this buy-in, and if you're a business owner or entrepreneur and you're anything, I mean, that's what every company's trying to do, and especially knowing so much about the fitness industry now, I look at companies like BPN and First Form. Like they not only have companies like where they're selling product, but there's a personal brand associated to where the people who work there, if you go on LinkedIn and you find anything about, people will talk about First Form all the time, that their company culture is insane because all of their employees are bought in, even at the warehouse level. Like at the guys in the warehouse are like they are soldiers for the brand. And then their customers at the same time, like people who like First Form or BPN's product, are soldiers for that brand so much that they want to be associated with it. And that's the type of culture a company like Lombard brought, to the point, like I was told this, my friend Marty, he's a cop up in Waterbury. He tells me all the time. He said, dude, if you moved back to Waterbury tomorrow and your name was on the ballot for something, he's like, do you know this city? He's like, if this city just saw your name on the ballot, they'd say, oh yeah, I know that name. And like they won't even look at you. They wouldn't even care. Like they see Lombard, they'll say, and there's last names like that. There's D'Amelio, there, Santa Pietro is popular. There's names in Waterbury, like these kind of like obscure nobility of certain families, like the guys who own the funeral homes and all this stuff, where if people see those names, it's like they'll trust it. Like they'll know because it's so into the city's roots. Like it's part of the city's like kind of rich history. Like you move back, dude, to run for mayor, somebody's going to see Lombard on there and they're just going to check your name. They'll find out that a Lombard's running. They'll be like, oh yeah, I know Lombard. I know that. I know
It's
that name.
interesting that you bring up trust, right? Because there's a in the people sort of wondering what's going on with society, sort of writ large. Never mind trucking, but like um, the sort of debate about high trust society versus low trust society, and high trust societies are marked by this. Like you develop a social reputation, families working with other families, small companies, people working together in a community. That is what builds high trust. And I think the high trust thing correlates with the sort of values and the sort of work together attitude that made your forefathers' company what it was, and made that dedication to service what it is, right? Like all of this stuff is related. And getting back to the LinkedIn broker people complaining about bad carriers, the low trust society model is a bunch of people who maybe don't know each other all that well and don't have any of this stuff built up, right? They don't have this sort of like, long standing kin networks and associations and things built from the ground up, and lots of people sort of codependent on one another. And so I guess the answer for those people complaining about bad service, sort of, it's staring them in the face. I want to bring it back to the Motor Carrier Act, though. So Lombard starts facing this, major price competition from other carriers. Your family goes off into doing real estate and other things, and I'm just wondering, does were there any other things going on at that time besides the price competition that you feel may have contributed to this, or is it like explicitly the price competition south, like downstream of deregulation?
There's nothing I can really think of that was going on because I mean I've asked my dad about it, and he himself doesn't know, because I mean my dad, he didn't have an opportunity to work for Lombard. He would have, if my dad didn't finish high school. He went out. He's worked in manufacturing since he was 16, but he would have graduated high school. My dad would have graduated high school in 1981, and the company sold, just a few years after that. So he never had that opportunity. So I mean, in 1984, I mean, he was 20. If I do the math right, he was 22. So I mean, he wouldn't have even been able to really drive if he had gotten it, because if he had started, he wouldn't have even become a driver, because he would have had to start probably working wherever, because you got to get into the union first. And I know that guys would, you don't always start off as a driver, depending on your circumstances or situation. So he never got into it, but he doesn't describe, like my dad never described anything else. My grandfather never described anything else kind of glaring going on. Ronnie doesn't mention it. He said in his quote, which I had said there when I had my conversation with him, that everything that happened to Lombard, he says, is because of the government. Like he puts foot, he definitely puts full blame on that. And I know that there's people, personalities and gentlemen we know on Twitter who would say, and I'm good friends with guys like Kevin Rutherford who would say, you can't blame others, you have to look inward. Are there ways Lombard could have survived it? I think if they had 2025 knowledge, like if they had kind of what all of us know now back then, possibly, but I also don't know because you're looking like that's a monumental shift. Like if you're like because if something truly paid, if it paid X number of dollars to move toilet paper from Waterbury to Baltimore, and then all of a sudden that gets cut in half, it would become impossible to compete, especially because I mean, getting equipment back then probably became a little bit easier, and especially as these companies were starting to go, I'd imagine that the price of assets dropped. I mean, the value of the company dropped. So from every person I've asked, from my grandmother, my grandfather himself saying it, Ronnie Lombard, my own father, there's really there was really nothing else going on that I can think of. I mean, they had great relationships with their customers. Like I said, I've got a plethora of these reviews talking about that brag about how great their drivers are and about how pleasant it was going to the terminal. So it's not like they didn't have good relationships. Because again, those at a certain point, relationships are going to go out the window. And I saw this myself, like when I was driving for Warren Transport, I had this conversation with my fleet manager and the VP of the specialized division, where the same freight I was moving in March and April of 2023 was the same exact loads, and this is contract freight, was moving for less in the middle of the summer when a lot of that farm equipment needs to move. And like they were explicitly telling me like I don't know who it is, but they are actually moving this freight for less. And this is freight that needed permits, needs permits, needs in multiple different states that are what's it called, permitted loads. And he's like, there's still people doing it for less. So and Warren Transport is a number, they got a four digit DOT number. They've been around for a while too. So it's like we see that relationships will go out the window. There's a dollar amount where the relationship will not matter anymore. There's always that going to be a fine line where you might be as good of friends with somebody as you are, but when it comes to the bottom line, if there's an opportunity out there, I mean, they're going to take it.
I was about to ask you that question. You talked about these great relationships Lombard has. Now that you almost completely answered it for me. How many of so before Lombard sold to North Penn Transport, how many of their customers stuck with them till the bitter end?
I'm not sure. I that yeah, that'd be that'd be a question for I guess somebody. I mean, perhaps my cousin might know that, but I'm not sure how many of the customers had stuck with them. I'd imagine it was probably. I mean, I'd imagine they peeled off as the years went on.
Yeah, the price thing is weird. So it's funny you mentioned Warren and permitted loads. Our friends Lee and Lisa Schmidt, they posted something on Twitter the other day about a guy being pulled over coming out of Dundalk or Port of Baltimore, and 16-foot wide load, and he got busted. No signs, not following permits, driver didn't speak English. I'm like, who gave a load that wide with that many considerations to it to a bottom feeder employing a driver that didn't even speak English? Like how are you going to read the permits? How are you going to communicate with the escorts you're going to need? Um, this gets to the question. I mean, beyond the regulation of the business, or the past regulation of the business, is you know this war on price and this constant, shaking down to the cheapest possible lowest common denominator, it produces these results. And I'll give you a story from the paddocks. They used to have a client named Vipond Fire Protection Systems. They put all your sprinkler systems in large industrial buildings, warehouses, factories, apartment complexes, whatever. So they would have these flatbed loads, which just look just miles and miles of fire sprinkler tubing, and each project would go often directly to a construction site from Vipond's plant in Mississauga, or it would go to another Vipond dealer somewhere, wherever, Saskatoon, Chicago. And but these loads took a long time to load. Like, it would be 2, 3, 4 hours for Vipond to assemble the load on the trailer. And paddocks would use local guys. Like, I did a lot of time working local for them. So I would bobtail, or I would take a trailer up to Mississauga, drop it, go move other loads, whatever, do other work, and come in, or swap them out, pull another loaded one out. And so we had this system, and the local guys would pull up, strap the load down, tarp it all up, get it ready to go, bring it back to the yard, and then the guy taking it to Saskatchewan or Chicago or whatever location it was going to would bang onto the trailer, and away they went. And every once in a while, we would lose work to other carriers, because there was this really great guy in the shipping office named Joe, and I would talk to him about this, and he's like, "Yeah, it's not up to me, man. Like, the accountants, I can't argue with them. They say these other guys are going to do it for $500 less. I can't, they overrule me, man. I'm so sorry." And we would lose work for a few months, and then Vipond would call us back and say, "Hey, can you guys do this lane for us again?" Because the other carriers would just send in some guy with a flatbed, whatever, but then the guy would be there half the day waiting to get loaded, and then wouldn't make the delivery time because the other carriers didn't have the local driver system that we did to do preparing the loads to go, right? And there was a cost associated with that. And like, companies have to understand, you want the service, you want competent people, you want the type of pleasant experience that customers of Lombard Trucking got. You have to pay. Like, this stuff just doesn't happen by magic. And I'm not 100, like, obviously with the regulation system before 1980, it kind of imposed a minimum amount of rates, which made it easier to provide that service. But at the same time, this is sort of a voluntary exchange between the people hiring you to move loads and the companies doing it. Do you need the government to dictate what that price is? I don't know. I don't think so. But since deregulation, it seems to me that, like, a lot of people have just completely forgotten about service. And in many ways, that seems to have accelerated, 4 decades later. I don't know if it's like echoes of deregulation, but there's just something in the air right now where, nobody wants to pay for anything anymore. And like, rates are still in the toilet. Part of that's probably downstream of the flooding of the market here recently. But I'm just still trying to wrap my head around why this notion of paying a decent, legitimate price that covers the costs in order for that service to be delivered. I don't know. It just seems like a foreign concept to some people.
Mike Tomlin, he's the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has a common saying, which is the standard is the standard. And in the Marine Corps, there was always there's always this saying when it comes to the standards you have to do in the Marine Corps, like your grooming standards, like your haircut and shaving. this idea of when like there was always this saying staff and CEOs would give is once you allow a lower standard, it becomes the standard. And I think about those two references all the time. And again, I don't have so when you do once you've either lowered or you've eliminated the standard, I mean, you have to realize like you might get, your balance sheet you might get what you want on the numbers, but are you going to get are you going to get exactly what you want? Is the money you saved in shipping like did you save as much money as you thought you would on shipping and transportation costs, or did you also have to pay more elsewhere, either in claims or whatever, in time, in misloads, missed deliveries? Like, is saving X number of dollars worth it when you compound how much stuff is late? I'd say that the cost is definitely outweighs the savings in a lot of different cases. I just don't think it gets see- I don't I think it's seen in the short term. And when it came to those standardized rates where and I know you had recorded an episode with the member of the American Communist Party, and I think it's very funny. But I mean, they have somewhat logical rhetoric in this space, to the point at which these standardized rates were the reason what made them standardized wasn't necessarily it was, yes, the government who would wave the wand and say, okay, this is what it is, but those rates and what the cost was negotiated by the labor. So I mean, like, you had the Teamsters, you had the union who was physically saying, like, this is what it should cost to run this lane, this is how it's going to benefit our membership, and this is kind of what it should be.
That
And
that
so
that makes. I'm just going to interrupt you real quick because a little light bulb went off in my head about a question I need to ask Belzer. I think now because you said the government waved the magic wands, but the rate is the rate, and it was built by labor. And I'm just curious, like I know you might not always know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask Belzer. Um, the oh geez, what was it called? Hoffa and the Teamsters had a organized oh geez, what was it called? Like a national freight agreement, or I can't remember the exact name, but it was like a contract that like covered most of the country between the Teamsters and all the carriers they worked for,
the
and
the
that
the master freight agreement.
yeah, and that sort of I just wonder if that was the sort of pillars upon which later into the leading up to the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 with these sort of like set rates. If those rates at that time were built up on stuff that Hoffa had negotiated.
Yeah, the with the NMFA is like I think what it's in reference is that National Master Freight Agreement, which because I know that that's associated with Hopper, which essentially was that's what it was, like that's what they had lobbied for, that which was what was going to offer the good pay, the pension, the benefits. That was the sustainable rate of what it was supposed to do, which, when you think of it, like, if we want to zoom out and, for the people, and again, I don't like, just, for anybody listening, like, I don't have an altruistic view of unions. I think the days of the unions in the days of Hoffa and up until the 80s were a lot different than how unions are today. And you could see this in this newsletter, because I know that there's some unions where they have these weird rules where you can't do something outside of your job. We see this in like the film industry, like you're only allowed to touch one camera, and you can't do this. And like there's these like very strict rigidness of what the job is. And I don't know. And I know that's, and yeah, like that, I don't see that in these newsletters, because in these customer satisfaction, it talks about how drivers would help the people on the docks and would go out of their way and offer this. So I think the unions are different. I don't think unions are just the complete answer. I mean, we see how Walmart is as a company to drive for. I know UPS is union, but they kind of also set a tone. Like, we see companies who are like Walmart by any means does provide what seemingly looks like what the industry standard was pre 1980. So I don't have this altruistic view, but if you like, we talk about, and I'm good friends with Kevin Rutherford, and I love these guys. But as a carrier, you negotiate your rates based on those same things. Like, you negotiate your rates, and you want certain rates based off of what's going to pay for your fixed and variable expenses. And that's exactly what Hoffa did. But he lobbied for that in a case of what was also going to just give somebody a good career, not necessarily, so it just happened to be more. And if, and that's, that's why, to not have the strength of the Teamsters, to do that just as a single truck owner operator, or to do that as maybe only a 10 truck owner operator, you don't you don't have that. Like we see, like the motor carrier, the small carrier, they don't have that power. Like they don't have that power to do it. We like Lombard had the most modest beginnings. And a lot of these old Teamster affiliated companies had modest beginnings, just like any. I mean, Lombard started with two trucks. It started with a wagon and 8 horses, and then two trucks, and was able to still acquire these assets, all because of things like these national standardized rates that the labor produce. So that way companies were able to grow and were able to do this. We don't have that now. Now you're able to, the idea of growth. And this, I mean, one of the reasons why I did sell my truck was because there was no growth. Like there was no, the only way to grow would be to accumulate more debt, is to get yourself deeper and deeper in debt. And that's the risk. And if your only risk is to just go into more debt to banks, and, kind of fire off a risk, then what are you building? I mean, that's not the American dream. I was just talking to a gentleman who, him and his father are doing this in southern Missouri. They're not getting into debt. They're building like the American dream, how they're able to kind of grow. Getting into debt is definitely not the American dream to me. So I mean, companies were still able to grow. Companies were still able to start, with these nationalized rates, and how I just don't see how that's not a good thing.
Right.
If that
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
no, no, no. I think in comparing, so you just said you didn't see a path for your business contracting to Warren without going more into debt. And this speaks to the what's happening now in 2025, where trucks are like new trucks are really expensive. You're expected to do all of this compliance and have all of this technology built into the truck. Insurance is really expensive. Fuel is expensive. Like everything is more expensive, but the rates keep going down. Like it doesn't make any sense. And then when you go into debt, now you're like have to pay off interest. And I don't. This idea of just like doing things on debt all the time. And I was talking to somebody else recently about the margins that companies make, and it's just so small. Like big trucking companies now are really lucky to do 2% profit margin.
Yeah,
Like how
and it,
how 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 is anybody supposed to build anything under this thing? And like sooner or later, it's going to collapse, right? So we see what's happening right now. I'm going to editorialize a little bit away from the Motor Carrier Act conversation because I'm a little bit torqued up about this. Right before you and I sat down, I saw some news online here about a gentleman killed in West Virginia yesterday. Highway construction maintenance worker, killed by a truck driver with a Central Asian name, accused of looking at his phone, crashing into a dump truck, and then hitting a guy next to it before he got stopped. Killed the dude. I'm very upset about this, and it ties into all of these accidents we see that are being caused by people who've recently arrived in the United States. And somehow, I don't know if these guys are building anything, but there's this, as the way Shannon Everett described it from our American Truckers United, there's a separate parallel trucking industry to the one that you and I grew up in and you and I operated in. And it's mostly run by and employs recent immigrants to the United States or refugees, or they're cycling in and out and flying back home. Who knows? Uh, Buying used trucks cash. So I talked to a guy at Matt's at a dinner I went to, owns a couple of used truck dealerships in New Jersey. And I asked him, how does it work when you sell trucks to the recent arrivals? he's like, oh man, that's most of my sales now. And I said, okay, so are any of them using financing, right? Because like if you live here and you want to get money, you have to borrow it either through like a credit financing company, the bank, whoever. He's like, no, those guys have no credit rating. Like they can't do that. They pay cash. I get a cashier's check. He's like, I'm like, do you know where they're getting their money? He's like, I have some ideas. It's either their kin networks back home or the government or somebody, but they come with a certified check and they buy used trucks from me and then they drive them away. So um, it just shits me that these guys come in and some of them are being abused. As I've talked about the indentured servitude arrangements in Canada, and we see little bits of that here in the States. And then this Biden thing where they just affect like they doubled the number of CDLs that got handed out in 1 year, and the we can't build anything, right? Like if I wanted to go out and start a trucking company tomorrow, good luck. You had one started and you saw no way forward for it, so you sold it. Um, how is it like some guy from Ethiopia can just show up here and get in a truck, like, and then go work for Amazon, hauling trailers around for less than operating cost? This is another thing. People talk about this stuff back channel, right? Like you don't see it too much on LinkedIn or out in the public because everybody's afraid of being accused of the R word. But how is it these guys are all operating below cost? How do we compete against this? And then you look at some of the load boards for spot market stuff, and it's just all in the toilet. And so we have on the one side, as you said, if you want to build a legitimate company and build something up like your forefathers did, it's almost impossible. Everything's built on debt, super narrow, super tight profit margins. And then you're competing with guys that showed up here yesterday, work for less than what your cost is, and somehow got money. People use the term crowdfunding. When you use websites like GoFundMe or GiveSendGo, these guys are doing the old school crowdfunding where they've got someone back home passing the hat around and then sending cash to America so they can go and buy used trucks. And so I'm just, yeah, I'm sorry for the rant, Mike, but it just pains me that this stuff goes on. And then these gentlemen are overrepresented in accident statistics. And oh man, back to the regulation part. We expect the government to do things for the people that live here and that were born here, right? So the government deregulates the trucking industry. There's pros and cons to that. You're here to tell me about the cons. I'm going to be talking to some other guys about the pros, as far as like, family trucking companies and stuff goes. But then the government is also supposed to like, it's their roads, right? The government owns the roads. That's their responsibility. And it seems to me like they're doing nothing to regulate who gets on them, right? And who is allowed to operate. Like they're handing out MC numbers to anybody that's got the money to pay for one. They're literally doing nothing to enforce standards on CDLs anymore. And it's the cost to that is being externalized onto society in many ways. Insurance is through the roof, and then we have all the cost in lives, and then the cost to the medical system, smashed up trucks, smashed up bodies. And I'm just, I don't know, man. I'm just sort of beside myself here with the, nobody seems to be, there's no sense of urgency to try and correct these things from anybody in the business or anybody in the government. I mean, obviously there's guys like us talking about this, Shannon and ATU and, our friends at CDL Drivers Unlimited. I'm not sure what's going on with those guys as of late, but like, and then OIDA. But it just seems to me like 45 years later, since the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, we're seeing this like, it's like coming to a head almost where, yeah, deregulation may have been necessary, but it seems like it went too far in the other direction. And now it's like basically open season Wild West, except it's like Wild West for the rest of the world. Like we're allowing the rest of the world to parasitize itself on the trucking industry here, and nobody is having a reckoning about what the costs are to us as a society, to us as taxpayers, and to the lost opportunity for people here to build a business, to build something up like Lombard Trucking. I don't know. I don't have a question here, Mike. I'm just ranting, but like, what do you
There's
think?
no I was just talking about this yesterday on a live thing I went through. Like there's undoubtedly room for everybody to win. Like, some people think that pre 1980, other people couldn't just get into business. And there's an argument on both sides to that. I understand, but well, before 1980, I wouldn't have been able to start my trucking company. And it's like, but would you have started like there's a reason why people get into business for themselves, and it's because that it is an opportunity to get yourself upwards and onwards to receive a better individual income. It can occur. Like we know successful fleet owners. You and I both know people who've built successful companies post deregulation, and that is true. But if you, but that's the thing. That if that didn't exist, if the opportunity didn't exist to start your own trucking company, and the other career option was you were no matter what making six figures with almost 30 days of PTO with full benefits and a retirement fund, you wouldn't have a reason to get into business. Like there would be no reason because you found a place and you found a business that operates that shares your ideals and values, somebody you can partner with and ride your career out with to do it. There's a reason why you got into business, and it was because as a business owner, there are benefits. Like even if you're a one truck owner operator, when it comes to how you do your taxes, writing off expenses, certain options there's ways you can get certain options for healthcare. Although I think it's harder to start a business if you have a wife and kids because healthcare is such a major expense. But there are ways to, that fit your lifestyle that being a business owner is great. But if you didn't have to worry about any of that, or if that carrot wasn't necessarily on the stick, and you had and I think if most people had the option to make six figures, not have to pay for healthcare and get a pension, I think the majority of people would float in that direction. But even after post 1980, again, I think that the way the Motor Carrier Act went out, yeah, I think it could have probably been adjusted because there is room for everybody to win. Because when you look at America, it is big. So if there is a family or an individual who did want to start a company and they had relationships with other local manufacturers, and they're like, hey, like if I like they would look like and those manufacturers want to work with you. They don't necessarily want to work with somebody else. There's definitely room for competition and for it to grow. And we saw that pre 1980. And I get this from Long Haul Paul and his podcast that he did over the road, where he talks about even pre 1980 independents, wildcatters, it still performed. I mean, they still did well financially because of the standard that was set by the Teamsters. So it's not by the labor and by those negotiated rates that there was this higher standard. So if an independent was, however they were moving freight, whether it be livestock or produce or what have you, whatever they were doing, they were still taking home a good dollar. So if there's a way to kind of negotiate that to where yeah, there was a larger union that at least set the standard. But you're right. At where are we at as a country? Because people love to talk about free markets all the time. Oh, it's the free market. It's the free market. It is not a free market when people are just in the situation you described. If they're able to come over here from wherever, Eritrea, Ukraine, Russia, South Pacific, wherever they're coming from. It's not a free market when they're able to come here and then they work and then they work and operate outside of the norm, outside of the rule of law in many such cases, outside of the standards of living. When you have no stake in the country, I mean, for especially with depending on what they have no stake in the future of the country. They're not living here. They don't own property. They're not voting. They're not they're not active participants in in the American society, in democracy, coming here, and they're just strictly here for cheap indentured labor. That's not a part of the free market. The free market would be the what's however it works amongst the citizens of your country. And if guys don't have that fair shot to do it, it's one thing because I didn't a lot of these bankruptcies we've been seeing, and FreightWaves has an entire page of these bankruptcies. And I got this from Mr. Beach and from Shannon. When you have Heartland Express, who by all means is a respectable carrier, and I've never heard a bad thing said about Heartland Express, for them to call the last 5 quarters Armageddon, but for other, larger motor carriers, um, and other people to be raking in money hand over fist, kind of like foreign based entities, they're thriving. We have a problem. Like there's a problem that's happening. And if we're just going to say it's the free market, it is what it is, you need to get better. It's You can't have that argument when this started from the government's action in the first place because it wasn't a problem before. It's a problem now. How is it the individual's fault? How is it mine or your fault? How is it all those bankruptcies? How is it their fault how can you be successful for 40 plus years and then all of a sudden within the past 5 to 10 it became Armageddon? Did they all of it just sudden just like say screw it? I mean, I'm not going to run this efficiently anymore. Did they just blow it? I maybe for some, but if we're not building a society in which your citizens have a fair chance to get ahead and that you're having to compete with if you're having to compete with slave labor, with indentured servitude labor, then that's not a free market. I use this reference a lot when it comes to making change. When it comes to, and I relate this kind of to fitness and how we should be sourcing our food. But Great Britain outlawed slavery in I think 1833, and the government in Great Britain had to bail out the country because it tanked their GDP. They were, headed towards a deep recession. This global empire just shifted from free labor to paid labor, and the government had to dig in deep and bail out farmers and all these other people to survive for the country to not collapse. So economically, market speaking, it tanked their GDP. They were headed towards recession. People were going broke. The businesses were failing. Should Great Britain have just reinstated slavery to make the numbers look good, to make the numbers on the graph look good? No, because it's immorally wrong. It's at the end
No,
of the day,
what they did is they unleashed the Royal Navy on the entire world to deal with the trade in humans. Like, a lot of people don't understand that, like, slavery as an institution has been with us since the dawn of time and in many ways is still operating just covertly. But the British Royal Navy, I don't know how many hundreds of ships that they commissioned to just do nothing but chase down slaving ships. Like, how much blood and treasure and resources and lives went into combating the world trade in slaves care of the Royal Navy, right?
and look at what they cost. Yeah, look at what it costs for them to abolish slavery. So as opposed to just keeping it going, so numbers look gooder, and we have this free labor, they made the morally right decision. And so, we could talk about business and numbers, but there is a moral issue in this case that I think people need to look deep. I think people need to look deep down within themselves and realize that what is going on is immoral. If you're somebody out there, who would you rather work with? Would you rather work with a guy whose name goes back 100 years in the industry? Because in my world, in my view, Lombard should have celebrated a 100-year anniversary back in 2023. There would have been a great parade in Waterbury. It would have been awesome. It would have been great to see. Would you rather work with that motor carrier, or would you rather work with a guy who got an MC yesterday? He's been driving a truck for about a cup of coffee and he does it for bottom dollar, and that's the free market. Is that truthfully what you want? Is that sustainable? And I think brokerages are in for a reckoning.
Yeah, you mentioned cup of coffee. I'm going to give you a little sidebar here. I was talking to a guy from Canada that I met at Matt's. He had 3 trucks there. He's from a little town in northern Ontario called Englehart. lots of forestry up there. He hauled logs and he worked for this big OSB mill. Lifetime in trucking, on the road, in the bush, did all the things, was very successful at it. And he's been noticing the problems with the sort of insourced labor and, all of the crashes. Like if you follow Skilled Truckers Canada or Bonehead Truckers or 401 to Sarpanch, every day there's some new accident in Northern Ontario because 2 lane roads for the two sections of the Trans Canada Highway, 17 and 11, for much of it. And just, high volume of truck traffic going back and forth to Western Canada, and a lot of it carried by these guys. And he was at the coffee shop. There's a little coffee shop right on the side of Highway 11, and there's truck parking there. And he's hanging out, and this guy comes in from a white Volvo, usual suspects, and he comes in and he just orders hot water because it's free. So this gentleman that I met at Matt's, he approaches the dude. He goes outside and he approaches the fellow before he goes back in his truck because he's noticed this. He's seen a repeated pattern of guys coming in to just get hot water. And he says to the guy, he's like, "Hey man, how come you guys just get like hot water? You never buy coffee." And the guy points, he says, "Truck, make coffee, truck." So they're carrying around, instant coffee, and I guess whatever, that's their choice. But the dude says to him, he's like, "Can you not like afford $1.50 or $2 for a cup of coffee?" And the guy says to him, "No, no money, no money, no money." That's all he said. He just said no money. And then the guy says to him, well, "Where are you going?" He says, "Oh, I'm Vancouver, Vancouver." So this dude is in a truck and he has no money on him, not even enough money to buy a cup of coffee. And he's going from Toronto to Vancouver, trucking, no money. He's got a fuel card and he's got a bunch of supplies in the truck, and he's begging for hot water from the businesses along the way because he literally has no money. Is that the trucking industry that Lombard Trucking built? Is that the trucking industry you want to operate in, or the people you want to compete with? And I'm not blaming this guy. Whatever, he might have just shown up here from India a month ago. I have no idea, but this shows you that there are people abusing the trucking industry, abusing government systems, abusing immigration law, abusing Canada writ large in order to throw people in trucks and say, "Hey, we're not going to pay you very much, but it's going to be a little bit more than what you made in India, and get in this truck and go to Vancouver."
I think
It's madness.
that's the most important part, is because so even that accident in Austin, the gentleman who was in that accident, I know he was from Eritrea, he's 37 years old. And the media won't do any investigating into how he got his CDL, which I think is the most important. But is it like that gentleman right there? You can't. I'm not going to blame that guy, the 37-year-old, because he would not have ever been in that situation if the opportunity exists. You like the
Right.
individuals, the people who are up in Canada, these individual drivers who are getting into these accidents. I like the ball isn't in their court. They're only there. They're only there because, as anybody in in those respective countries is going, like people themselves, like humans, as human, it's human nature. Humans respond to incentives. Humans are like, we as people are always going to seize the best opportunity for them and their family. And if something is presented to them, 'cause that's the thing, that guy in Eritrea, if the option didn't exist for him to come over to the US and get a CDL, and and longer than it takes to do whatever, in a short amount of time. That's the thing. He wouldn't, that opportunity, when like, you can't blame the individual for this happening. It's not like he woke up one day and it's like, "I'm going to go to the US, do everything I can to become a truck driver, and I'm going to," and even though I don't speak English, like, it's not like they woke up with this like sense of spirit being like, "I want to move to America to be a patriotic truck driver and serve that country. I want to live there and assimilate and be a part of this." No, that doesn't exist. Maybe they want to come to the United States. There's many people who want to come here, but they don't want to just come here off the rip and drive trucks. But it is this one open door opportunity where they can come here, and it does pay better than coming here and washing dishes or working in a restaurant, which are other industries that, again, I think in the ag industry that work off of. The ag industry is definitely another dark horse. There's some darkness going on with indentured servitude labor going on there, but they don't wake up and do this. It's not the guy from Eritrea's fault. He was not he was not for like he was kind of forced here. He was presented with an opportunity that this would be the best thing for his future, and he was brought over here by something bigger than him. Something bigger than these people are bringing them over here. They're not collectively like consolidate and be like, hey, what can we, how can we just get over there and be bottom feeders? Like they're not, they're like, that's not how this conversation and situation is going. Something higher than them is pulling them in to do these jobs for some reason.
Yeah, and the higher something higher than them and higher than us too is allowing it, and that's called the government. And that's what, my rant earlier was kind of about, is that they're not, they do have a job and they do have a role and they're not doing it. And this is the result. This poor guy, uh, you know, clearly he was overworked. I've seen reporting that like multiple HOS violations on his ELD. So, and he seemed pretty out of it when he got pulled over. So maybe he was delirious from fatigue. And I don't want a trucking industry that allows this to go on, right? And all of the ELDs in the world are not going to fix the incentive structure. And the incentive structure itself is being messed with by all these loopholes that allow guys to come here and just get a license handed to them, even if they don't speak English, right? Like there's a bunch of loopholes and there's a bunch of corruption going on that is allowing this bigger force, as you put it, to bring these guys here and sort of ruin it for everybody else. And again, yeah, not to blame them. They're just responding to incentives, right? Um, anyway, back to back to Lombard Trucking. So what are you doing with yourself, Mike? You're you sold your truck. You're not on the road anymore. But you've taken on some other roles. What's going on in the world of Mike Lombard Trucking?
Yeah, I guess what's going on my end, I guess to kind of bring the conversation full circle, especially for your book and for the audience, is we can't put the lid back on Pandora's box with the Motor Carrier Act, but there's definitely a way to fix it. I think we see people like Lindsey Trent over at Next Generation in Trucking. They're doing something that's very similar to how you've described the CDL process in Australia, with like graduated licensing. And I think if we combined, I think if we combine the efforts of, I think if OOIDA and the Teamsters are able to, join forces, and other organizations really come on board and start to really just and get on the same page, there can be a way that raises the standard and raise it, like again, it would raise the barrier of entry into the industry, that could make the industry. And if you raise the barrier of entry into this industry, and we talk about like Lombard's, hey, we like there's a way where we can return to have an industry that's very similar to when Lombard was thriving, and it takes a moral team effort on that. I think I do, like, in my personal opinion, just from how I see it, and again, I'm somewhat biased. I'm more sympathetic to the idea of I think long term it made things worse, and we see these ramifications later on. Like the blowback from the Vietnam War, we probably didn't see until the 90s, is like when really things started to unfold. Like we didn't see the exact ramifications or the results. Like we didn't realize like how bad it was uh, destabilizing some of these countries. Like we see the result in like 10 or more years, and that's kind of what's happened in trucking. Is like things are finally coming to roost. Technology, I think, has expedited it, especially with fraud. Now we're able to see all of this fraud going on, and so there's a way to fix it. It's going to require making harder decisions that will raise the barrier to entry and won't be as inviting to any swinging Richard who wants to come in. But some work needs to get done, and I think it starts with helping an organization like American Truckers United. But on my front, on the Lombard front, Yeah, essentially, I mean, I spent all of 2024 full time in fitness, but similarly, but I didn't stop. I kept my finger on the pulse of the industry in a way of continuing to make content, continuing to help coach some drivers. I spoke at uh, I spoke at three. I had three speaking engagements last year, two at Broker Carrier Summit, and I gave a great presentation to Hayes County bus drivers on driver health. I've definitely picked up this. Picked up this banner because as I'm posting a lot of my content, I have this philosophical belief that, if you as an individual, when individuals lock in, like this idea of personal excellence, like, so when you yourself at the individual level do everything you can with personal excellence, and this is fitness and just otherwise. Like this is like, yes, you becoming the healthiest version you're able to become, but not only that, but just well, it's actually one and two. It's a 1-2 punch. The healthier and healthier you get, and the more you make yourself, the more you yourself become great, the more apt you're going to be to wanting to help be a part of the solution to problems, and how many more doors it opens, and how many more you just have the steam and the vigor and a little bit of more motivation to get involved into having conversations like this, or making your own content, or getting involved in advocacy. So I mean, I get this from a guy whose name is Andy Frisella, this idea of personal excellence is your number one rebellion. So I have this deep philosophy that if especially drivers, really dial in on their health and fitness, then you're more likely to be in a situation where you will advocate and you'll stand up for yourself. Like you have this resurgence of confidence that's going to make you do things like tell cheap brokers to fuck off. You're going to not do stuff for less. Like you're going to have the confidence to really dig your heels in and fight back. So I stayed doing that, and all the while that happened at the end of last year, Reed Lucelo from Truck Parking Club, he gave me a call because I got accepted into this master's program at Texas A&M for marketing. I still have a little bit of GI Bill left, so I'm thinking about how can I use it. And obviously, I make content, and I know and so I was like, oh, well, I wouldn't mind getting some free knowledge on marketing. And he had called me, said, "Are you going back to school?" He's like, "Evan and I were talking, and we'd love to have you on the team because of everything you do. Like, who I am and who I became is why they wanted me on the team." And he had told me that coming on board, he's like, he's like, you should keep up with all your fitness certifications and coaching, keep doing Ironman, all that's needed, because all the while in 2024, I teamed up with a couple companies in the industry, like Mark Manera's Off Shift and the people over at Green Screens. And I've Jeremy Raymer has started a nonprofit called Project 61, which is solely dedicated on driver health. So I've attached myself with some of these companies to train for Ironman events. And now that nonprofit is off the ground, I'm helping Jeremy raise money for it. Ran my first full distance Ironman in November. Getting ready for, I got 11 days till my next one in Texas that I've been raising money for. But yeah, I joined the Truck Parking Club team at the top of the year. And similarly, what we were just talking about in conversation, when it comes to like being bought in, Truck Parking Club as a company within in this industry has an entire. It's not just a company that's trying to help solve a big problem out there, and it's really one of the only ones. I talk about this a lot. When it comes to truck parking, the government can't seem to figure it out. Bills keep dying. They Local cities, municipalities keep putting in truck bans. They won't build facilities. Like Truck Parking Club is really coming out as the only change agent of actually trying to make a dent on it. But the staff, it's more than just a company solving a problem. It is a brand that is really growing, that the employees at Truck Parking Club want to be there. Because they feel as though they're a part of it, a part of the company's success. Like people who work there feel as though that they're just as important as the founder. That they're just as big into the mission. Like they feel as though it's in their blood and DNA too. And that's kind of what I got brought on to help too, is to get more drivers in on that as well. It's like Truck Parking Club is this brand that pays homage to companies like Lombard, to the old days and the old school and the old iron, and that breed, that like sense of Americana that you get at places like Matt's. Like Truck Parking Club is that brand that is, without a doubt, for the driver. I'm stoked to be a part of it, and I mean, other than that, yeah, I'm continuing to, I keep my show going, which I'm trying to just get more I'm trying to talk to as many drivers as I can. I find a lot of value in driver stories. I think the more and more driver stories that are just out on the internet, the more and more I have weapons in kind of myself and like our advocacy. Like we have more weapons and evidence to present to who we speak to about these issues of like I know this driver who's this is their story, this is their story, this is their story. And when you could just show that evidence, it becomes, it carries a little bit more weight. So yeah, all in all, I've doubled down on myself, my own personal brand. I've doubled down on trying to become the best I can in the triathlon world. I feel as though the more clout I'm able to get, within the Ironman arena. If I'm able to do things like perform in the top of my age group, it gets a little bit of attention. And every bit of attention I get, I immediately like to shift onto the issues within the industry, like driver health and fitness, like truck parking, like pay, like all the issues we just talked about on the show. Any bit of clout or attention that's spotlighted on me, I can easily reflect onto these bigger issues. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, what I've been diving into.
No, man, it's been interesting to watch. Like I say, you've got this high energy, almost manic personality at times, and you know, this is the problem: is that like trucking as a industry is sort of an afterthought to most people. Like all the groceries at the grocery store show up there as if by magic. The fuel station's always got fuel. You go fill up at the gas station. Oh, there's always gas there. How'd it get there? Like nobody even thinks about it. And not thinking about it, they're also not thinking about all of the problems facing the industry. So in your efforts to, take attention you're getting and then, refract it towards all of that stuff, that's commendable, even if you're no longer behind the wheel. I get There's this little weird thing, like there's this sort of like old mentality that like which I sort of understand where it comes from, but I don't agree with it. That like if you're not actually behind the wheel anymore, like you're out, you're not suffering with us. So what you have to say is irrelevant. And part of that I think too is reflected in how the industry operates. Like I've been talking to people recently about the difficulties of getting back into trucking if you take a break from it. Like you still have a CDL, you still have many years of experience, but if you were out of the industry for 2 years, a lot of insurance companies won't touch you now. And it's like, hold on a minute. Did my previous 2.5 decades not count for anything? So there's this like weird mentality. Like if you're not actually chained to the wheel like everybody else, your opinion no longer matters. Any effort you might be trying to put into fixing the industry and making it better for the people still behind the wheel is like it comes into question. But it's like if you're always behind the wheel trucking, it's difficult to make the moves to do the things necessary to fix it. Right.
I've struggled with that identity crisis too, and I don't think the door is ever shut between getting behind the wheel because depending on where I can take things, especially as I try to advance in the fitness world and try to gain some notoriety and content in ways I can stream. Like I would love nothing more than to still try to get that MC number or at least because I kind of know the game now, like getting in. And just with the relationships I've built with so many brokers and other people in the industry, like I would love nothing more than to uh, own a motor carrier again and set a standard for the industry. But again, I'm not gonna like I like that's neither here nor there. But when it comes to and this is so and I've struggled with that identity and I've been there are a lot of times and there was a point in time last year where I was very close to just jumping back in and going over the road where I was like, man, I got to get back. But when it comes to the outside forces, and this is for anybody who does carry that opinion, like, oh, they're not driving anymore, so they don't matter. When it comes to the outside forces, the forces that be that are force having these changes, allowing the non-domiciled CDLs, like all the issues we just discussed, everything that's happened, all of that is because of people who've never driven a truck and have never and have like I just say this because I was recently at the Texas Capitol with TXTA talking about tort reform and I was talking about truck parking and everybody and all a lot of the people who came from TXTA, it was me and I think like one other guy who actually had a CDL. Everybody else there who is at the Texas Capitol, who was talking about this tort reform stuff, none of them are drivers. So when it comes to organizations, whether it be state or a larger at the ATA level, it is all non-driver personnel who's putting forth these efforts. So if for somebody who did drive to get outside, if they're still tapped in and keeping their finger on the pulse of this industry and they're showing compassion and wanting to help change it, those are the people you need to throw your weight behind the most. So to have that judgment like, oh, he Lombard doesn't drive anymore, or like the gentleman on LinkedIn, like he works over at this company now, he's betrayed drivers. All that does, so rooting against guys like me, rooting against guys like you, all that does is help boost the platforms, and it actually helps our enemies. Like it helps the people out there who are working against everything that we're trying to talk about in this issue. So any of those, and but again, by design, I think the Motor Carrier Act fractured the industry by design to make sure that it could stay fractured, so that way the industry doesn't fight for a better or higher standard because it keeps everybody so separate. So again, I've struggled with that identity, but I've kind of just let it roll on. I'm going to keep doing what I do. I'm going to keep speaking how I speak but just know if there are people who are passing judgment, you're helping the enemy out. You're helping the enemy. You're helping those who are working against your beliefs. Again, aligning yourself with somebody with shared beliefs is the best, and supporting those people win is the only way that we're going to move forward and keep these conversations going forward.
Right. Well, I'm glad we're all simpatico on that. And again, the continued positive messaging of Lombard Trucking, the brand, the man, the Iron Man, the no man, I love it. I really resonate with the fitness thing, because if you can't, if you're not feeling good about yourself, how are you going to stand up for yourself? How are you going to stand up for the industry? You got to put your best foot forward, and I really appreciate what you're doing in that regard, sir. Um, Man, 2 hours. Is there anything else you'd like to share, contribute, final thoughts, anything regard the initial question about the Motor Carrier Act?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to close it out with again, the Lombard story is my why. Everything I do, like so, how I compete as an athlete, like I compete for guys like my grandfather. I compete for those morals and those standards, but I'm competing for the American truck driver. Like, there's certain athletes out there and guys I've met in the fitness space. Their why has to do with um, other certain issues. I know a lot of, there's a gentleman out there, ultra marathon runner. He's big. Like he races for all those who are recovering addicts and alcoholics. Like that's his why. Like he wants to be as great as he can to show those people what you can, how, like just how far you can go, having him been in prison and being an addict. And the same way, like I compete at this level for the American truck driver to know that that's who I race for. I race for the industry. But the Lombard story again is more than just a story. It was a brand and a company that people felt as though that they were a part of, that was larger than them, larger than life. And I'm here to continue, and I'm going to continue to tell that story. And I can't emphasize enough how anything I'm trying to build over the years is just I'm like the mirror that if that light comes towards me, I'm just going to reflect it on the problems to help solve it. Just know that, yeah, everything I'm doing athletically has everything to do with and who I am. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to emulate what this story was. Like this story that I get to read in taillights and these stories, I'm trying to carry that into the 21st century. The original Lombard was built off this brand of great customer service, awesome relationships, treating people with respect, treating people well, just really long-standing stuff that everything we talked about in the show, all these good things, who Lombard, like, because Lombard was more than just a trucking company. It was a brand. It was something people identified with. It made people from Waterbury proud to be from Waterbury, and I'm trying to carry that same name. The Lombard name was so strong for almost the entire 20th century, and I'm trying to step into those same shoes in just a different way in this, with teams like Truck Parking Club and doing it everything I'm doing athletically and be and and kind of, a lot of people get involved in advocacy and what they're doing in different ways through various organizations or through their own content. And I think that this is the avenue that makes a lot of sense for me. And I think it's just another piece of the pie where it's like, we've got this former trucker turned Ironman who's talking about these issues. Maybe we should start listening. That's what I'm doing. So, I mean, I just really appreciate you having me on again. It's always great to talk about these issues, tell that story. Um, it's important. We need to keep them rolling. But no, thanks for having me on, man. I'm pumped up. I'm pumped up for the race in 11 days, and I'm pumped to see what the next couple of years are going to look like.
What's the name of that race? Where is it located? How can people find out about it?
Oh yeah, the race is in the Woodlands, Texas, which is just north of Houston. So if you're in the area on April 26th, that's race day. It's Ironman Texas. So yeah, it's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 miles on the bike, and a 26.2 mile run. Ideally, perfect world. I'm able to get it done in less than 13 hours. My Florida time was 13:44, so I'm looking for a big jump off of that. And yeah, you can follow me on social media. I'm everywhere at Lombard Trucking, podcast, the Lombard Trucking Show, which is on all platforms. And yeah, I mean, if anybody, and also at the same time, if there's any drivers out there who are truly looking for some either one-on-one coaching or community, a Slack group, I've got a free Slack group. But if they're looking for one-on-one coaching, I am all on board and helping you start building some healthy habits that can help you get better and get people back in the fight.
Thank you very much for giving us your time, Mike, and relaying a bit of history from the family business and helping me out as I try and figure out this book and sort of tell the story of the American truck driver and where he's at in 2025. As I always end the show, way of the road.